In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ESA.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Curious Dimension podcast, where we explore the mysteries that challenge our understanding of reality. I hope that you've been enjoying the conversations as much as I've been hosting them. Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And if you want to stay updated with all of our latest episodes, be sure to hammer that subscribe button. You won't want to miss any of the exciting discussions that we have lined up. Finally, we love hearing from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's episode or any questions that you might have. Your feedback means the world to me and helps me shape future content. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most intriguing and controversial topics in planetary exploration: evidence of ancient structures on Mars. Our guest is none other than George Haas. George Haas is the founder and premier investigator of the Mars Research Group, known as the Cydonia Institute, and is the member of Society for Planetary SETI Research, SPSR. His research encompasses over 30 years of study and analysis of NASA and ESA photographs on Mars. His early schooling was in the visual arts. He is an art instructor, writer, curator, and the former director of Sculptors Association of New Jersey. During the 1980s, he exhibited extensively throughout the New Jersey and New York area and was represented by Grace Harkin Gallery in New York's East Village, and had a one-man show in 1989 at the O.K. Harris Gallery of Art in Soho. In this episode, we go through a bunch of photos of the Mars surface showing anomalous features and structures from George's latest book, The Great Architects of Mars. We'll discuss what these formations could mean, the latest findings from space agencies, and whether mainstream science is ready to acknowledge the possibility of artificial structures beyond Earth. Buckle up, because this conversation is going to challenge everything we thought we knew about the red planet. So without further ado, here's George Haas. This is going to be super fun, George. I've been looking forward to this one. I've been interested in this sort of topic for a while now. I've been aware of some of these photos on the periphery, and I've heard the arguments back and forth, and I've been wanting to get somebody on here to talk about this for a while. And I think you've had about 30 years of experience going down this topic of these structures, anomalous things on Mars. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got presenting for us today.
Very good. I look forward to being on your show. I've heard a lot about you recently because I didn't even know about you until just when you invited me on. So of course I wanted to find out who I was dealing with here. So looks like you're going to have an interesting show, and I hope your audience enjoys what we're going to present for them today, because I got a lot of stuff here that I hope they all have their shoes tied tight, because I'm going to knock them off.
And just as a little background here, you have been looking at this for over 30 years. You're the founder and the premier investigator of the Mars Research Group. I think that's known as the Cydonia Institute. And you're also a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research, SPSR. And you've been looking at these NASA and ESA photographs of Mars. And also, are you a member of the South American cultures? So you're aware of the artifacts and the cultures of South America, Olmec, Maya, and Aztec. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was members of the Pre-Columbian Society of the University of Pennsylvania, and also the base here in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
For years, I used to live in New Jersey, and I would go over to the University of Pennsylvania, and on weekends they would have glyph workshops, and I'd participate in that. And I did that for years. They also had Maya weekends once a year, which they invited all of the prestigious archaeologists that were coming up with whatever discoveries they had during that time period. And they were guest speakers. It was a great time. It was a whole weekend. When they first started, it was Saturday night. They had the mariachi band. They had margaritas, the whole birth. And then the next day, 2 days, they'd have all of the lectures and stuff and workshops. It was a lot of fun.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Now, you've written 3 books, and what you're presenting today is your 3rd book, correct?
Correct. My first 2 books were co-authored with my good friend, Bill Saunders. He's a geomorphologist. He lives up in Canada. Him and I met on the old Richard Hoagland discussion board back in the day in the late 1990s when it was free. And Bill and I met on there. We were like on the same page looking at the face on Mars and some of the surrounding formations. And we became friends. And Bill and I wrote our first book, never met each other, didn't even know what he looked like. I didn't know what kind of music he liked or anything. And we just talked about Mars and we wrote a whole book. And I didn't meet him until after the book was published. And we participated in one of the conferences in Maryland called the X Conference. And that's where we finally met. And we actually worked on a second book. Our first book was published back in 2005. So we go way back. And the second book, the Martian Codex, the first book was called the Cydonia Codex. That was published with North Atlantic Books. So we had a real publisher. And the second book was, I think, in 2009 called the Martian Codex, which was just part 2 with more examples of structures. And we concentrated on a lot of pictographic images in our first 2 books. And then after that, we published 6 science papers with members of the Society for Planetary SETI Research. A lot of people don't even know about the society. They've been around since 1991, I believe they established. And they've had all the luminaries of this Mars research. They had members of Horace Crater, Stanley McDaniel, Tom Van Franlin, Dr. Mark Corlado. All these people, they're all scientists. They're all either some type of science degree. A lot of them are physicists. So it's a really established group. And they've published numerous papers in science journals, peer-reviewed science journals. And of course, the public really doesn't even know about it. These papers are published and nobody reads them.
I had a conversation with Dr. Mark Carlotto a couple of weeks ago, and I've got his site, and he has published a lot of scientific papers in and around this topic. And so he is well versed in this. I look forward to having another conversation with him. But today, I want to talk about the great architects of Mars. I know you put together an amazing presentation for you. I've got some questions, but I'm going to let you go through this, kind of present it, and then maybe I can interject here and there, and we can dig into this.
All right, Matt, when you contacted me, it was right in the midst of this new controversy, which I guess was started by Joe Rogan. He's, I guess they call him the number 1 podcast. He's your competition. I don't know, after today, you may surpass him with this one. But somehow on X, the old Twitter, somebody posted a picture. This picture that everybody's looking at looks like a square ruins of a foundation. It's pretty well deteriorated. You can see the 4 corners, but it's pretty beat up. And it's probably about a mile wide. It's very big. Everything on Mars is large. Joe saw this and he started talking about it, and it's gone viral. And it came to the attention of our good friend, Elon Musk. Said this was very interesting formation, and we need to send somebody he's in the position to do this. We need to send somebody to Mars and check this out. So to let the audience here and the viewers and listeners see what we're talking about, let's go to the first slide in the presentation here, Matt.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for tuning in. If you're enjoying this episode and want to help us uncover more mysteries of the universe, don't forget to support Curious Dimension. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button. It really helps get this content in front of more people who are curious just like you. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to click that notification bell too, so you're the first to know when we release new content. For those of you listening on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to follow or subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and a review. It helps more than you know. And whether you're watching or listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below or send me a message. Thanks for being part of the Curious Dimension community. Your support keeps this journey going.
Here's the first slide. This is in Arabia Terra on Mars. And this image this is very old. We discussed this back in the early days, early 2000s. This was released in 2001. So somebody's digging up an old image, and this is what they're talking about. They're very excited about this. And as you can see here, that you can see the walls, right angles, goes down here. It's all buried in sand or whatever. And it's very impressive. What are your thoughts there, Matt?
Yeah, so the photos that were posted on X and that Joe Rogan posted, it was a more kind of defined picture. Somebody probably done some resolution work on the photo, and it looked very square. This looks more realistic, like it's been covered in dust and maybe ice and other things there. But at first glance, I'm looking at it, I can see right angles at the corners. It's difficult to tell just by these photos alone, but I know that once you start digging into the photos and you look at like the angle of the area photograph. It tells more pieces of the story.
Yeah, the images that Joe is showing, or whoever posted this originally, they're pretty poor. This is an unaltered image. All I did here was put the line in. This is a crisp Mars. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter took great pictures. They went right down sometimes to 1%, 2% of their resolution. So this is a really nice photograph. So this is the first image.
Mm.
Now, what I've done here is just did a comparison showing the original square-shaped ruins, the formations on Mars. This is over in Afghanistan. These are the ruins out in the desert, showing the same thing with sand covering it over. You can see a similar corner here that we have here. So I'm just doing a comparison showing that if we were to see ruins like this out in the desert in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia, archaeologists would say this is artificial.
Mm. I see.
Now, what I did was, now that this has attracted a lot of attention, I went back to the NASA website to see if there was any new pictures of this. And there's about 5 or 6 new pictures of this on available to the public. Obviously, nobody out there has gone to look and see what's out there, but I did. The results were pretty startling, as you'll see. This is actually a perspective view. This is the formation we're looking at right here. And this is all next to it. As you can see, it looks more and more natural.
Yes.
Now that we have a perspective view and get a more expansive look at all the terrain that's around this. This is actually inside a crater on Mars. And when meteors hit, they bring up all kinds of upwellings of rock and things underneath. And that's what this appears to be. With these newer images, it seems to be less and less artificial, in my opinion. Now, this is just showing the overlay. The original image from the Mars Global Surveyor image, these all line up down to this point here and come down here. So this is just a little off. The CTX images that NASA releases, the Mars Reconnaissance, they're context images. And a lot of times they're a little distorted. So it may have to be adjusted, but it's pretty similar. You can still see it's a impression of a rectangular foundation here, but not as square as we saw in the other image. Now, this is the area, this is the outer wall of the crater. This is where the square formation is right here. Now, interesting, in the crater, all this interesting stuff is up here. All of these little pyramids, these are all in a row here. So this actually looks very interesting up here, as opposed to, this may have been a structure at one time, but it's pretty beat. It was. And as the audience will see in my presentation, there's much better examples to be looking at than this. This is awful.
Exactly. This is something I just wanted to talk about because this has been doing the rounds on the internet, and I'm glad that we had you here to talk about it a little bit.
I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but from my opinion, the square foundation looks more like it was just a part of a hillside there that deteriorated, and it looks like a foundation. But in retrospect, it's probably just a natural formation. This is all of these formations above that. You have a lot of interesting things like this, these big mounds. So who knows what all this is? Is this just highly deteriorated mesas and mounds that are in here? Or was there something else going on here? Are these just really massively destroyed pyramids and things like that? But again, what we'll be seeing in my presentation here, much better than this. But this is still interesting, as you can see, some little shapes here.
And for context for the audience, if these structures were artificial or made by somebody or something, we're talking very old, like maybe millions of years old, maybe 1 million years old. Is that kind of the time frame when we think Mars may have had sustainable atmosphere?
Oh yeah, I have evidence to support that, along with Dr. Brandenburg, and also mythology from Mesoamerica, the Maya, talk about these contacts with Mars about 1 million years ago.
Okay, awesome.
Everything on Mars is pretty old. The interesting thing about Mars, you don't have a lot of weather. You have weathering, flooding, and stuff that'll just destroy structures. If you look at a lot of the ziggurats over by the Sumerians and the Babylonians, they were like mud brick, and they're just deteriorating. You could hardly tell that they look like old deteriorated mountains, but they're actually structures. But we know they're structures. But if you were to take a picture of that and look down, you'd say, oh, that was just a highly deteriorated mound. But because of the weathering that we have on Earth, things are just destroyed. And luckily on Mars, we don't have a lot of weathering. So whatever happened to this is a natural area, or if this is artificial, it's hard to tell.
Interesting.
And my mouse is just shooting things away. So I got
Yeah.
to start the presentation. I usually start off with this image of Earth. This is Xi'an, China. And I put little white dots. So it's very easy for the audience to follow. I'm trying to show them that the Mars MOLA map is a very flat map and it has these high contrast. The blue area here, this would be, come on, Mousy, the water area. This is the lowest area. These high mountain areas, this is where the darker oranger color, that's the higher elevation. So it's just basically an elevation map that we're looking at.
Okay.
Right? And this is in China.
Okay.
Come on. I have to buy a new mouse. There we go. Back to China. During World War II, a pilot flew over the area. His name was James Gaussman. And he photographed this out his window of his airplane during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And this was developed, brought back, and nobody believed. They thought this was a hoax. This has been considered a hoax for 50 years. It's been in weird magazines and evidence of pyramids in China, just like in Gaza, and nobody believed it. That was until the advent of Google Earth. Now, Google Earth, before the Chinese got upset, they were taking pictures all over the planet, and we have these pictures. There's different years that Google has taken these, but this is a nice picture of some of the pyramids that are over. These are actually in China.
Mm-hmm.
And we have these beautiful four-sided pyramids. There's about 100 of them. They're all over the place. And what China has done to some of them, you can see this one here is a little deterioration. They planted grass and low shrubbery and things to cover them up.
Mm.
And they, for a long time, still said there was no pyramids in China. I think this wasn't resolved until the mid to early 2000s.
Wow.
Yeah. So they finally admitted, but nobody's allowed to go there. You can't go investigate them because these are sacred pyramids. They were probably there before the Chinese moved into China. I have no idea. Nobody knows. But I'm just trying to show the audience that there's things on Earth that we're not aware of and it's hard to prove. And where did these come from? We don't know.
There's pyramids all over the planet. I think
it appears
that. Yeah, they're everywhere.
The next slide, we're going to go to Elysium. Now, Elysium, we can see that with the little dot here.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we're going to start.
So now we're looking at Mars. This is the molar map of Mars.
Correct.
Okay.
And all of the blue areas, this is all low. This would be where the scientists talk about the Paleo Ocean on Mars, all the shoreline here. This area here is where the famous face on Mars. This is Cydonia, right here next to the shoreline. This is all low water area. This is where we're finding there's a city here in Elysium. These dark areas, this would be a very dark, deep pool, big ocean here. This is another waterway. Water comes through here. Just so they know what we're looking at. And we find a lot of these structures in these little city areas that we're finding are within 30 to 40 degrees north and 30 to 40 degrees south of the equator. In these areas here is where we're finding.
And why is that significant?
It's basically the same thing you're finding on Earth, that all the civilizations evolved in that area because it's the sweet spot, nice weather, and it's next to water. Finding similar idea on Mars, if these are artificial structures. Back in the early 70s, the Mariner 9 spacecraft went to Mars and was the first spaceship to go out there and photograph the surface of Mars. And this is an area of Elysium. And these were the famous Sagan pyramids. You see this three-sided pyramids?
Yes. Tetrahedral.
Tetrahedral pyramid. Carl Sagan was very interested in this. He included this in a lot of his work. But the interesting thing is, a lot of people don't know that it was actually originally discovered in the Mariner 9 images by Gibson. And he had a paper written called The Pyramidal Structures on Mars back in 1974. This is early work. So scientists were looking at these pictures and finding pyramidal formations on the surface of Mars way back before Richard Hoagland or any of this stuff. And this guy doesn't get a lot of recognition because, of course, Carl Sagan, he was very famous. He had his TV series Cosmos, which he presented that same pyramid on. It was in his book and on his TV series.
He was the face. He was the face of these sort of topics back then. So he was the authority.
The billions and billions of stars and his quotes. But yeah, he was the guy that everybody went to. And he never discredited these pyramids. He said we needed better pictures and it was something we should look at. And that's all mentioned in the book. And one of his famous quotes is that intelligent life on Earth reveals itself through geometry and the regularity of its construction. That was one of his famous quotes. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing geometry. Now, this is the original Mariner 9 image. You can actually see the little crater here. This picture was from the Mars Reconnaissance, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2007. Now, unfortunately, Carl Sagan died in 1996. So he never got to see any of these new images. The last image he saw, which is mentioned in the book, was a Viking image, which was taken in the mid-70s, like 1976, 77. And it was awful. The camera was very pixelated, and he really couldn't get any resolution on what this was with the Viking image. If he had seen this is a much more crisp image, and there's a lot of these, so he'd have a lot of signs to look at. And what we find by going into this area where Sagan's famous pyramids are, there's pyramids everywhere in this area. And that's the whole chapter in the book about all the structures that are in that area. This is another three-sided pyramid that's in the area next to Sagan's famous pyramid. Again, you can see the straight lines. This is a very tetrahedral shaped pyramid. These are two polygonal pyramids that are in the same area, and they're almost identical. You see that? It's pretty amazing. And these are in the same area. One's more in the center of the image, and the other one's a little up at the top next to pyramids. And these are just remarkable. And you can see the 5 points. They look a lot like what I call star forts that are here on Earth. They're pentagonal, and these things look like they were just carved out. Now, when I discuss in the book, you'll find why these points are curved, which we won't get into that now, but it's interesting. I will see how this whole thing curves. And what it does, it aligns all the pyramids in that area. They all align with each other. And I compare it to American Indian mounds that are normally formed in circular patterns.
And what I'm hoping to do, George, if you don't mind, I understand we're going through this quickly, and your book is on the way, but I'm hoping we can also have you back on so we can maybe drill down on some of these photos at a later time. But I know what you're doing is great here. You're doing an awesome job. So I just wanted to tell the audience that, but I'd love to have you back on if you're open to that.
I'd come back once a week if you want me.
I got a few people that I want to do that with as well.
I have about 500 images I can show you. And if this book does well, the publisher is willing to do part 2, because I have 4 more books in the can that are waiting to go that have just as much interesting stuff like this. So this is the first one. We try to put some of the best things together and how it would all flow together. But these are just very interesting. And I call this one the Star Shield, and this is Star Shield Junior. It's just a little guy. And even if these are artificial, how do you have something in nature that almost looks identical? Bizarre.
How close are these two together on the complex in the area?
A couple miles away. They're in the same strip. The whole little complex of the Carl Sagan Pyramid complex there, they're all the same area.
Okay, got it.
This is just a comparison of a similar star fort. Star forts were very popular in France during their wars. We used them over here during the Revolutionary War. The North, the South, we had a lot of star forts. This one is the Fort Santa Teresa. This is in Uruguay from 1776. This is an old one. And you can just imagine if this was all covered with dirt and dust and ice, then it would look a lot like what we're seeing here. It's the 5-pointed star fort. They're amazing. And there's a lot of star forts we're finding on Mars. And as we'll see later in the presentation, there's a lot of evidence that Mars had a lot of wars. So it would almost be reasonable that they would build these star-shaped forts, which have these bastions, which are very protective for military purposes. Moving on, this is another part of the planet that is very interesting. And this is Nepenthes Mesa. And we were over here with Elysium. Now we're just moving a little southwest. And again, this whole complex that we're going to be looking at, again, is right next to the water. This would be the waterway. So it's another settlement near the water. Again, Matt, this is another star fort. It's pretty amazing. It almost has a doppelganger here on Earth. This is Fort Henry, very famous fort that was from the Civil War. This was in Tennessee, constructed back in 1861. Now, the starburst on Mars, you notice, see this flat area, which is odd. We have the same thing here.
Right.
The top of it's flat, and it has buildings inside. This has 3 mounds inside. It's just amazing that we have this. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see the similarity there. It's difficult to tell just from the photos, but if you're talking about similarity, yeah, I can see it.
Right. Now, there's numerous pictures of these so we can compare And all the NASA images have ancillary data about the time of day, the resolution and all that, which is very important when you're trying to figure out size and dimensions. This is just below that star fort. This is another pentagonal formation. It's got the 5 sides. Also the interior is very interesting, has like the stepped mound configuration. But again, its basic form is 5-sided pentagonal formation.
In your book, do you go into like the striations of like wind, and you can see like the direction of like wind to address the possible wind erosion and things like that?
We do with some of the images later in the book, but I think in this chapter, I don't really get into much of that, because what we established is that you'd have to have so many different wind directions here to create this.
Right.
Which would be destructive. If you had wind coming this way, this is very rounded here for some reason. This is almost like an arm.
And so we're thinking this is a pentagonal pyramid with step structures within it.
And in the book, which I haven't brought here, I have an example of a Mesoamerican pyramid that's very similar to this, with that weird steps. It's not a symmetrical stepping. It's kind of like this, which is in the book.
Okay.
So I do a lot of side-by-side comparisons of things. And this is also in the same area, Matt. This is below that. NASA takes these long strips of the surface. They go on for miles and miles. And this is just in the lower section of the same strip. So
can we talk about how big, like, for example, because I think it's probably a pretty significant piece of information, like what size of an area are we looking at right now?
From here to here, this is probably 2 miles.
Okay. Got it.
Very big.
All right.
Everything on Mars is large. Now, just generally, I've been looking at this stuff for years, so I know this is your first time you're looking at it. We have a pyramid here. There's an odd-shaped geometric form here. You have these long rods here. This has stripes on it, and there's a couple little meteor hits here. This is another rod. It's got a meteor hit there. There's a lot of little meteor hits. This is another circular dome, and these are on platforms. This is on a platform. This here formation is very symmetrical. We'll see a close-up of that soon. So it has all of these little geometric shapes all over the place here. And here's another 3-sided pyramidal form, very straight edge. Now, you would think—
Do they know what the rock is? Do they know what like the geology is of this area?
Not really. Some of the areas they do it because they have a spectrum that they can tell what possibly these are made of. What the consensus is that a lot of these are covered with dirt, dust, and ice.
Right. But the Mars rover hasn't been over here to take samples.
No. And so basically, if these were structures at one time, they accumulated a lot of dust and ice over, so they have a little mantle over them. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
This is just my outline of what we're looking at, trying to get the geometry of these structures. This is a circular mound with a square mound in the middle. Same idea of the opposite circle and square. We have another rod. This is a very interesting formation here. There's a triangle formation. So all this speaks of geometry. You have all these little circles, another pyramid with circle. This is a hexagonal mound here. This is a close-up of what I called the crowned kite. This is that little formation. This is the one right in the center of the group. Now, notice all the other formations seem to be very basic geometry. Circles, triangles, hexagons, polygonal formations. This one is very intricate. And it's very symmetrical. This here seems to be highly deteriorated on this wing here, but you can actually see there's a line there. And so this is a proposed image of its geometry. But even without that, it's a very symmetrical piece. It has like a beak here, a very symmetrical line running through the formation. I show this to a lot of people. They think this looks like some kind of spaceship.
I was going to say a bird in like a diving position.
Yes, it does have that bird look.
Yeah, it's very cool. Can we just go back to that one real quick?
Yes.
It looks like, I don't know if this is like weathering there, but it looks like there's an overhang to it. Is that a shadow just to the right of it? So is it like dug out underneath of it?
You're talking here?
On the right side. Yeah, right there.
Yeah. Yeah, this looks like there's shadow here. That this has a lot of form to it.
Okay.
It's not just raised up over the surface. This has more structure to it, and this is shadow. So yeah, this is pretty well elevated. I think this side might be covered with a little sand and stuff. Now, the other interesting thing is you see all these little needle lines?
Yes.
This is supposed to be parts of sand dunes and things, all this here.
Okay.
Now, we have pictures of this 20 years different pictures, probably 5 or 6 pictures of this. And all of these lines are the same. Nothing changes. It's like these are just permanently in that shape for some reason. And we find these around a lot of structures. And the NASA scientists and geologists, they just say these are dunes from wind. So you would have wind, they would say, coming this way, and you got wind coming this way. So if you had wind coming this way, why is this straight?
Okay.
And
Got
doesn't
it.
make any sense. See what I'm saying?
Yep. I see what you're saying.
But these things don't seem to change anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're frozen, whatever created those.
Excellent.
This is that formation down at the bottom of the complex. It's on this oval foundation, which goes across to the top here.
Mm.
What I'm doing here, like I do throughout the book, compare it to known archaeology and architecture on Earth. This is a American Indian mound that's found in the Shore Johnson Mound Group.
Okay.
Almost identical again. As above, so below.
The old Hermetic principle.
This is again the same area, a little further, I think, to the west. But in the book, I have Mars maps that I show where one area is, and as opposed to the other one. So all these are in generally the same area. It's like New York and Trenton, New Jersey.
Right. So this one looks like it's raised up a little bit on a plateau as well, with a little sort of nub in the middle of it.
Yes, it has a knob here in the middle. Again, very geometric shape. Here we did the outlines in the study that's in the paper. This is a little pyramid here at the side.
Again, do we have an idea of the size of what we're looking at here? Is this like a quarter of a mile long? What are we looking at?
I think this is very similar to the face on Mars size. This is about 1.5 miles.
A mile and a half. So
yeah, they're huge.
This is important because once you start scaling it up to that distance, the geometry becomes more significant at that scale, right?
Correct. It's not just a small little rock that you find that looks like this. These are huge landforms that it would be very interesting to figure out how you would get these angles with wind.
And once you start zooming out, it starts to, the imperfections are shown by nature.
It does have some type of damage here, this crack that goes through here. I don't know what caused that, but overall, that's the shape of it. And remarkably, I found it's doppelganger. I found this in Turkey. This was taken by the Corona satellite back in the 1960s. And I think we had discussed this before, that the current images, you can go on Google Earth and see this whole area is just covered with cities, the contemporary towns that are all over. You don't even see this mound anymore. So I'm lucky I found an old photo of this from the 60s where you can just see the ruins of the ancient town here. And interestingly, on Mars, we seem to have this grid-like textured pattern on the opposite side.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's the elongated hexagonal mound. That's what I call this one.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Now we're going to move over to Libya mounds. Again, we're right next to the shoreline.
Okay. Libya mounds.
And again, we're just working our way across. Again, we're nothing deep into the terrain of Mars. A lot of these are found around the edges.
And it makes sense that if you were going to build something, you would be close to the water. So you have food supply, transportation.
Sure.
I mean, that would make sense. So this one, I've seen this one before. And this one, all right, I'll let you go. Explain to me what's going on here.
This is the famous Keyhole formation. NASA called this an exclamation mark in their paper or on the caption. They release thousands of pictures and hardly ever do they have a caption explaining what you're looking at. Usually it's just picture and ancillary data and go at it. We don't know what we're looking at. But this one, they went out of their way to even invite one of the NASA scientists to come in and tell us that this was nothing to look at.
So, I mean, let's talk about this for a second, because if there is wind erosion here, why would there be a cut through it? I'm not a geologist. I don't know. But as I'm looking at this, you can see the striations, right, of where the wind would be coming from. And it doesn't seem like it's 100% lining up with that cut where the little dot would be and through some of the other side. So do you go into that in description in your book? Do you address that?
Yes. My co-author from my first 2 books, William Saunders, and we had a geologist come in. We had a science paper you'll see at the end of this that was written about this. And they did a geological analysis of this, the wind directions. Because basically, if you had wind coming here, creating these two lines, that would obliterate, this would just wear down. The same thing on this side. So you have to have wind coming here, wind coming this way, and that would be down to a point. But we have this big dot down here, and then we have a hole through the middle here. And again, we have all these mound points. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You see, these are, and even in all the different pictures, these lines are still there. It's just remarkable that these are remnants.
And again, this is a huge structure. This is like, how big are we talking here? A mile from top to bottom?
At least. It's in the book. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't remember how big it is, but it's at least over a mile.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, this is part of the geometry that we talk about in the book. William Saunders and Michael Dale. And in the new book, I basically have excerpts from the science paper that are in that chapter. So it's really intense.
Okay.
So this is the keyhole, just showing all of the geometry that we're looking at and the measurements. It's just remarkable. This is like a smoking gun on Mars. That's what I call it. This is one of the two smoking guns that is really hard to explain. And when geologists look at this, they're just dumbfounded. They just don't know they can't explain this.
It's definitely a weird one. It's just, I imagine they scratched their head on that one.
They do. And the science advisory that's from NASA, that's in the ancillary data portion of this strip. This is a high contrast. This is the large Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. This is a high resolution image. This isn't just and there's about 10 images of this through the Themis images, the Mars Global Surveyor, and things like that. So we have a lot of images to look at, but this is the highest resolution image that we work with in the book. And we compare this to these typical keyhole formations. This is found in Saudi Arabia. These were used as tombs. These were built by the old ones, or they don't know who actually built these centuries ago. And there's lots of these. You can go on Google Earth and see these. So they have the circle at the bottom and the triangular wedge at the top.
So it's not uncommon to see the similar formation on Earth.
No, it's a common architectural form that we see here on Earth, and then we're finding it on Mars. This is a comparison of back to China and Japan. This is a Kufan tomb in Japan. And I'm just comparing it here to the keyhole structure on Mars. Now, these tombs in Japan, they're numerous. They're all over the place. The legends are, and the history is that some of the ancient emperors and things of Mars, there's a slip. The emperors of Japan were buried in these.
Interesting.
And that's a very striking comparison there. The keyhole formation we had a science paper published in the Journal of Space Exploration back in 2016. And like I said, excerpts from that paper are published in the book with the geological analysis by William Saunders and Michael Dale. The paper is available if the listeners want to go to the Cydonia Institute website.
I'll put links for all your stuff in the description. Right. So if the listener wants to go down there and check out this stuff for themselves, they certainly can.
And they can read that without even buying the book. And hopefully that'll intrigue them to want to buy a book, but it's there for free.
Yeah, and I encourage people to do that. Go read this stuff, make up your own minds. He's making a scientific case here for anomalous structures on Mars. And I think there's probably some aspects of this that are quite compelling.
Thank you. Moving on to Atlantis chaos. And we were over here. Now we're going this way, but we're coming around. Right. I had spoken about a lot of these settlements we're finding. These little cities are next to water. But if you zoom down here, which in the book, my little dot here, the settlement that we're going to look at is right next to a huge waterway like this, a big area that had water. So it's right next to waterway, but a smaller waterway. This is a aerial view a view of this area we call the Martian Atlantis. Now, we only call it the Martian Atlantis because it's an Atlantis chaos. It's got a little play on the ancient Atlantis.
So this photo, I get excited about this photo, number one, because you see the grid-like structures. And I'm going to let you talk about this in a second. But when I see this, at first, my first impression is that, okay, if there's a grid-like structure here, I don't see why this would be something that would happen in nature. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not a geologist, but that's my first impression. I want to hear you talk about it for a little bit, and then I want to ask a couple questions on this one.
Sure. What we find interesting here is this compartmentalized grid. These are all like foundational walls. You can see some of these have points that go up. And, that none of this looks natural. And in nature, we'll make these grid-like patterns, but usually they're very small. They're like 10 inches by 10 inches, nothing this big. These are all about 20 by 30 feet.
Okay.
Cubicles. The other interesting thing we see here, this is the cliff area. This is all within this upper area of the mountain or whatever this is here. We have a dome here, like the Capitol building with a little peak. You see the dome? Over here, there's a step pyramid that goes up like a tower. This formation here. This here, I call the wood mill. This because it's right next to the waterway here. There's like rocks on the back. It has a little chimney. What I tell people when they look at this is like, why is everything in ruins, but we still see these three main structures stand? And I don't know what this is. This is either a large mound or a rock. This doesn't seem to have any features on it. But the reason that these three formations may have survived whatever destroyed all this, in Nagasaki, when we dropped the bomb on Japan, the main church in the center of the town was still standing. Everything else was destroyed. And this may be getting back to Dr. Brandenburg. John Brandenburg talks about evidence of nuclear wars on Mars and things like that. So this may be the remnants of that destruction.
Yes. And I want to talk about John Brandenburg in a second, though. But could we go back to that photo real quick before we go on to the next one?
My mouth lets me.
I can edit this. Don't worry about it.
There it is.
Okay. So my question is this. When they're taking this photo, is it taking at some kind of angle or is this coming straight down on this? And if so, is there possibility for shadow and artifacts here? Tell me about the angle of this is being taken at.
I don't have a precise angle, but this is not a directly overhead shot. It's more a little bit off of its nadir. I'd have to look at the ancillary data, but that's a very good question. But that's all available in the book for people to look up. But it's not a directly overhead, as you can see, because these you can see side. It's more of a slight angle.
So the dome in the middle, that's an actual physical thing. There's no way that could be a shadow of something.
No.
Okay, got it. All right. Yeah, if you look at that, to me, this is one of the more compelling photographs here because it looks the way you would lay out like a plan, like a city plan with streets and.
Yeah, and as you see in the next slide, this whole very tight, conjoined city structure is a common architectural. This is in Saudi Arabia. It's like looking on Mars.
Right.
And there's no streets here. These houses are all connected. Everybody's on top of each other.
Right, it's like
very
flovillas.
Small little walkways between, but everybody's on top of each other. A lot of the roofs, these are all ruins over there. As you can see here, how it goes into the cliff. It's just like we're seeing on Mars. It's unbelievable.
Interesting.
Now, this is just a close-up of that area I was talking about, showing the peaks. This is in Machu Picchu in Peru. The same thing, the roofs are blown off and the nice peaks. And same thing with the same grid pattern.
Oh, yeah.
And just
actually, now that my eyes are adjusting to that on the left, I can see what you're talking about there with the peaks there. It's just taken from a different angle. That is
right.
And there's a lot of them all in a row.
Oh, yeah. It's once your eye adjusts and you actually see this stuff, it puts a chill down your back. I'm telling you.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe because now I'm looking at it for a minute longer, I'm starting to see. I don't know if I want to see it or if my eyes are adjusting to it, but now I'm seeing the symmetry of that. Yeah.
There's stuff inside of these. Pretty amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's compelling.
The Martian Atlantis, this was like all over the discussion boards a couple of years ago.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm absolutely sure.
Here's a close-up of you can see the peaks here, Matt.
Oh, yeah.
This is the dome. It's got a little peak at the top. You can see the rim here, very shiny. This is very much like temples in India, very ornamental. This is the wood mill.
Right.
Just looks like something you'd see up in Maine, going next to the water flowing down here, and the old wood mill. Okay, it looks like a barn.
It does.
At a place. Now, this is directly far down the strip from the Martian Atlantis complex we just looked at, all the grids. This seems to be highly deteriorated foundations. We have this triangular piece here. There's an arrow head-shaped formation here, another triangle. This one here has all these boxes. You can see this in the book. I have higher resolution pictures that you can look at. This is all repetitive of this triangle shape. And here we had what I call a bow tie. And then there's a triangle here. So a lot of this is very geometric.
Mm-hmm. And what are we looking at here? Is that in the top right corner? Do we have some sort of fractal pattern structure?
Yes. Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
I have
mean, if
side
that's
by
what's going
in the
on there,
book-
yeah, go ahead.
In the book, there's side-by-side pictures of this. I'm showing you where the lines are, and then you can actually look at the blank piece and see, oh, they're all right there. Very easy to find. And they're all basically the same rounded corner squares. And in the book, I do a comparison of an American Indian settlement, I think out in Arizona or somewhere it was found. They were putting a road in, and they found all of these foundations, which are very similar to this. One building built next to another one on top of it. It's amazing. So it's the whole fractal structure, which compares to what we're seeing on Mars. So just showing people that this is not unheard of.
Right, we have examples on Earth.
And this structure here, I compare to American architect. He does these like this Japanese inspired origami structures. This is like origami.
Interesting.
Right? Remarkable. This
Very
is like this of course is like an American Indian arrowhead. And I do comparisons of arrowhead shaped architecture. Everything is compared to what we're looking at on Earth. And the interesting thing about this, one of my friends, he does all these measurements for me. And he found that these measurements here were all very similar. It's like sets of 3 different dimensions that are repeated throughout this. And if you were to build a city, an area with build some type of buildings architecture, you would have a common measurement of things just to give it a unity.
Sure.
So, and there's another complex below this one here. There's these structures here. This one here looks like a big bell. And these are all highly deteriorated. Here's another triangle. And so the geologist looking at this, how do you have all these things create these shapes? This up here, this is a chevron.
Okay. Yep.
And again, the same measurements we saw with the last group are all consistent in this. He's done measurements of this according to this and from here to here, and they're all seem to be common dimensions.
Very interesting. Let me ask you a question here, because one of the things I'm deeply interested in is metrology and the study of measurement. Have you and your research partner gone through and tried to decipher what unit of measure they may have been using, like cubits or something else?
No, we did not get into that, but that would be another step. Good idea.
Yeah. Just curious, because I know we do that here on Earth. We've deciphered a lot of the hidden proportions within the Giza Plateau, for example, converting it back to the Egyptian cubit and looking at different measurements. Through that, you can see a lot of these harmonic proportions and ratios that people have discovered. So just curious.
The measurements are actually in the book. There's another slide that has all of the, and that could easily be looked at and compared to what is the basis of this measurement. That's a very good point. We probably should have done that, but we didn't. There's so much going on.
You're right.
But that is a very good idea. I have to talk to my good friend, Jim Miller, who does all the measurements for me. Think of that. Moving on. Now we're going to go from Atlantis chaos down here back to this more water here. This is the RG Basin area.
Okay.
This is the famous Parrot. The Parrot was called Pareitopia. This was found by a member of Jim Miller's. He had an anomaly hunters website back in the 1990s, early 2000s. Before Facebook, a lot of groups that were interested in looking at this, there was discussion boards. You'd go on, become a member, and you could discuss, post pictures. And he had one called the Anomaly Hunters. William Faust was one of the first members that joined. He was a city planner. He lived in Pennsylvania, up in Philadelphia. He was also an anthropologist. And he found this area here, and he was very intrigued by it. And this is a huge parrot. You can see this is the head. Here's the beak. This is the body. There's a foot here. The foot there's like the parrot is laying on his side. This is his one leg. The other leg's up in the air. He's dead. He's been killed. There's his foot, the tail come down here. You can actually see the frets of the feathers, the feathering area here. You see all that?
Yeah. And now there's an example of this in the US, or sorry, it's on Earth somewhere in some culture.
not of a parrot like this, but there's a lot of parrot geoglyphs built by American Indians and things like that. I think over in, I think it's India, there is a huge eagle
Okay.
that is on his back dead with his leg up in the air, but it's an eagle. And he only has one wing going up because I think something to do with the early mythology, fighting with one of the gods. He got his wing cut off and he's laying down with his foot up in the air. We didn't put that in the book or anything because it's an eagle, but it's the same idea. But I'm not familiar with any parrots on Earth like this.
Now, what's the 22 points of anatomically correct parts of this? So what type of study is that?
With Will Faust, when he found this, we were very excited, did a lot of research. Our first idea was, let's have a science paper. So we had William Saunders, who was a geologist. My background is art. I'm not a scientist. I'm a painter or sculptor. And so I know artwork when I see it, and this looks like a lot of artwork. So we put our heads together and started a science paper. And we needed a veterinarian to take a look at this, somebody that knew birds' anatomy. And we contacted 3 veterinarians and we sent them images of this through the internet, the digital images, and asked for their explanation. You know, what were they saying? And they originally, with the first image, this is a newer Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter image that came out in 2022, I believe. But the early image was back in the early 2000s, Mars Global Surveyor image, which is a very high resolution itself. And they found 18 points of anatomical correctness in that. And that was all verified with we had 3 geologists that looked at this. And the only thing we couldn't see in the earlier picture, this was a little blurry.
The back leg
out there with the toes. It just didn't capture it. But everything else was just about the same. When we got this newer image, and the first image back in, I think, 2011, we had published in a science journal.
Yeah. When I look at the leg there, the bottom leg, that looks very interesting. And then the eye and the beak.
The toes.
What is that word? It's called when people see faces in like clouds and they're making things, that they're seeing things. Can you tell me what is that word?
There's a lot of words people use. It's pareidolia is what you're
Pareidolia. Okay. So
that's
go ahead.
Pareidolia. That is the position that a lot of detractors of this type of research take, that, people see faces and animals and dogs and birds and everything. They look at trees and they see the leaves look like a face. They see faces in rocks, faces everywhere. This is nothing to look at. Very dismissive.
But this is, how big is this thing? Again, are we talking miles?
Yeah, this from the beak here all the way to the tail, it's about a mile.
Okay.
So that seems to be the magic number with a lot of these structures. Everything's 1.5 miles, some things 2 miles, but everything's really big. It's mind-boggling the size of these things.
I suppose if you just saw the beak and the eye, that would be one thing. But then you have the beak, the eye, the legs, the feathers coming out of it. It starts to become a little bit more. It starts to become a little bit weirder when you start adding all these different points in here.
And they're all in the proper position where they're supposed to be.
It's that one. Okay, that one's weird. For sure.
So if you see faces in trees and rocks and in the landscape or clouds, they always say you can see faces. They're usually a silhouette. There's hardly any real detail. But this here, there's the eye, there's the upper beak, the lower, you can actually see there's a tongue in here.
Are these dunes? Are those sand dunes?
These are what we talked about earlier, these sand dunes, that all the pictures, these are identical. It's like they've never moved. Over 30 years, we've been looking at this, probably 20 years. And the newer images, everything looks the same. It's the same thing with any of these geometric formations. These dunes seem to be just frozen, which is odd. So he has this feathered beak or feathered dart sticking out of his beak. You notice that?
Yes.
We talk about that in the book. So that's the whole. My feeling is that this parrot that we're looking at on Mars, this is what the Maya called the principal bird deity. This is creation mythology. He was present in the early days of creation. He was also called Seven McCall, which is celestial connection to the Big Dipper, which has
7 sisters.
7 stars, exactly. So this was Seven McCall, principal bird deity. According to, in the Maya Popol Vuh, which is basically their early Bible, records the creation mythology of the first mother, the first father. They had the hero twins. The hero twins went looking for the principal bird deity because he had stolen the sun. in the early creation time. And he took the sun, he had hit it, and he was sitting up in the world tree. The world tree grew out of the center of the earth, and that's where Seven McCall would be sitting up there. And they found him and they shot him with their blow dart and hit him in the beak. This up, and he supposedly had teeth, and it broke his teeth, and he had like silvery, and he had teeth that were made of gemstones and stuff like that. But they hit him in the beak and he fell down to earth, and they killed him. And this is basically the principal bird deity what we have here is a dead parrot. And
Fascinating.
he's just resting. He's just resting.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, you ever seen that skit? Now, when we first went public with this on the Anomaly Hunters discussion board, we got a lot of that criticism that everybody made fun of it. They said it's the Monty Python stuff. But over the years, this thing, it's like what I call the double barrel smoking gun. It's the Parrot Geoglyph and the Keyhole. These two are extraordinary. And
you have the myth.
If I had to show anybody two examples, those would be the two I would use. And if they don't see that, then there's no hope.
Right. And you also have the myth that goes along with it. And that's something I think a lot of people discount is these oral traditions, these myths of these ancient cultures. A lot of people think, oh, they're just making things up. Maybe. Or maybe they're telling a story of something that kind of has kernels of truth in it that have just been going back a very long time.
It's like the Zechariah Sitchin with the Anunnaki and the Sumerians and his interpretations and translations of the early text. Archaeologists and researchers, they just think this is all mythology. That is, until you find stuff on Mars that are connecting with, supposedly the Anunnaki were on the moon, they were on Mars, and here we go, we're finding all this stuff. So it's just interesting.
Oh, for sure.
Just everything we're finding on Mars, Matt, started with the face on Mars and this parrot. Everything seems to have a direct correlation with the mythology of Mesoamerica. Now, we're not saying that the Maya were on Mars, but somebody that influenced them long ago had direct contact.
And at the end of this, maybe we could save a few minutes to go down the speculation town.
Sure. Speculation town. Here's Pareidolia. We were going to get to that. The history of Pareidolia started this Skeptical Inquirer magazine, Soul magazine. And there was an article in there about, there was a whole group of researchers that were trying to dismiss any attention that the face on Mars was getting. And they said the face on Mars only looks like a face because you suffer from pareidolia. Pareidolia, interesting word. Where does that come from? Comes from 1860 in a science journal, the Journal of Mental Science. Pareidolia is a mental disorder that people have that are borderline crazy, that see faces on walls and on everywhere. And it's a mental disorder. And that's what he talks about in this science publication about this disorder. He's a psychiatrist, psychologist or whatever. And this word was used in the Skeptical Inquirer to dismiss the face on Mars, saying that, this is just common pareidolia. You don't know what you're saying. That's where the history comes from.
Okay.
And of course, humans, we have a propensity to see faces, and sometimes a faucet with the handles and the spout coming out looks like a nose, and maybe it's a deer or an elk, or maybe it's one of those cups the Griswolds are drinking out of, ear on it. So we anthropomorphize things. And in the book I talk about, there's a whole section of this. I talk about the false images. And if you just put 3 dots on a piece of paper, people see 2 eyes and a nose.
Okay.
That's not man-made, but we did make the arrangement. It's like looking in the clouds. You don't need to be a weatherman to know that a cloud is up there and that other thing over there, the straight line, was produced by an airplane. That's all right. Contrail. We can make a decision. We don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a meteorologist. And as Bob Dylan said, you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing.
That's exactly right. You can notice it.
So that's the whole thing about, and that had to be addressed in the book because a lot of people use that term constantly. It's really annoying.
Sure.
This is just an American Indian, Hopewell Indian copper plaque that was produced. It looks very much like the profiled image of the parrot we're seeing on Mars. This is another parrot. This is one of the oldest cities in Mesoamerica, Uethlin City Complex. Note the parrot shape. It's got the wing up here. This is the head, tail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
This is just, when they built the city, of course, they're referencing the principal bird deity. This is an architectural drawing that was done showing the city plans. I didn't do this. I got this out of a archaeological magazine or a book that was on this. It's pretty startling that the Maya were just so obsessed with all this mythology and stuff that they actually produced one of their cities to look from the air like the principal bird deity.
Interesting.
The Parrot on Mars was published in the fall of 2001 in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And then 10 years later, almost to the day, in 2022, again, this was with the newer image and the 22 points of anatomical correctness. So it's published in the same journal twice.
Very cool.
Now, as we spoke about earlier, I lived in New Jersey. I'm in Virginia now. And when I was in New Jersey, I would go over to the University of Pennsylvania, go to the Maya weekends. And one of the weekends, it's mentioned in the book, when I went over there, I got to meet Simon Martin, who was he's actually has art background, and he got involved in deciphering Maya hieroglyphics, and he's very well known. And he ended up putting out this book called The Chronicle of Maya Kings and Queens with Grimm, another famous, well-known archaeologist. And he had been giving a talk over there, and he also headed a workshop, and I was at his workshop. And I learned about this place called Naranjo. I had never heard of. Naranjo, Spanish word, means orange. And Naranjo, interestingly, a lot of their text on the mounds and on their monuments, in their pottery, the hieroglyphics talk about an ancient star war that happened between Naranjo, Tikal, Cozumel, and a place called Sixth Earth Place. And this is the glyphs for the Star War. This is a Star War glyph. Now, I know a lot of people think, oh, Star Wars, that's like George Lucas, Luke, I am your father. And, but nothing to do with that. Just that's what the Maya called this. It was a Star War. The Star War happened between Earth and Mars. Now, this glyph here, this is a bar, which is 5, and a dot, that's 6. So this is Sixth Earth Place. Now, Sixth Earth Place, their patron god of this so-called fictitious place, which archaeologists could never find. They don't know where this place is they're having a battle with. But the Maya, just like the Sumerians, counted the planets from the outside in. The Sumerians, like Mars would be the 6th planet, Earth would be the 7th planet, Venus would be the 8th planet. Maya did the same thing. Earth would have the number 7. The Sumerians would have a 7-pointed star for Earth. They'd have a 6-pointed star for Mars. They also had stars with 8 points for Venus. So
which is interesting because they're not counting Pluto as a planet, which we didn't do until the mid-2000s.
Correct. But that's how they counted the planets from the outside in, as opposed to we're a third rock from the sun, which totally numbering system. We're counting from the sun out. So that's it. And in my first book, we talked a lot about the comparisons between Sumerian history and stuff we're finding in Mesoamerica. Interesting place. They're having this battle and these wars with a place called Sixth Earth Place, which is actually Mars. The patron god of Naranjo was the Zip Monster, also known as the Mars Beast. This is him here. This is his eye. His head goes back. This is his mouth he has a nose that goes back. Over here, this is a glyph for an axe. This is the handle with the axe blade here. You see that?
Yes.
So this is the war god. This is Zip Monster Mars War. You all got that? Now, this is in the Dresden Codex, which is housed in Germany. That's why it's called the Dresden Codex. Now, archaeologists believe that the reason the Zip Monster has this this nose that goes back on itself is because they're showing the relationships of Mars. When you see it in the sky, it appears to go back. It has a retro orbit at night. So that's also mentioned in the book, but we go into what the whole idea of how that is, why the nose is like that. This is another image of the Zip Monster or the Mars Beast. This time he has 6 orbs on his body, which represents Mars, and he is the embodiment of Mars. And he also has the back flipping nose here. This is his teeth. Here's his eye. There's another tooth down here. It's the lower jaw. He's got a little beard. So I know.
Can I ask you a question real quick about the circles there on his body, which I'm assuming represent the planets? Are they do they, first of all, do they represent the planets? Number 2, are they in proportion to the size?
No, they do not represent the planets. These are just 6 orbs. The number 6 is a reference to Mars.
Okay, got it. All
just like we had, if we go back here, this is a 5, 6. So there's this number 6.
Got it.
So here they just put the numbers And in the book, I go through numerous examples of these zip monsters with the number 6 added.
Okay.
So, this is just one of my favorite ones.
Mm.
Now, on each end of this, this is a huge monument. I don't know. This is probably, 6 foot long. This sits on the ground when you go to, it's an outdoor museum. You can see this. I think this is called Altar O or something like that. Real scientific names. Now, on each side of this, on this side and over here, there are pictures of mythology. It's in the book also. One side has the creation couple, and then the other side has, I think, a frog and fish and stuff like that. All this mythology stuff's in there. This is the Madrid Codex. This shows zip monsters in human form. They all have the zip monster head. These are the snouts that go back. You see that?
Yes.
We're all carrying the axe. We saw the axe next to the zip monster in the Dresden Codex. These up here are called starred sky bands. They're coming out of the sky.
Okay.
This X here, that's for the 4 corners of the sky. That's with a lot of glyphs that are in here. And here he's carrying a torch. But these are all, I call this the invasion of Earth.
Okay.
This is the zip monsters coming in. This is what they're talking about in the Madrid Codex. The Dresden Codex is basically all about Mars. It talks about its rotations and orbit and all that kind of stuff. Speaking of battles, this is the sun, Captain Sun up here. This looks like a Stargate. It's very deteriorated. It's got a figure in the middle. He's sitting on a jaguar. And that's at the top of this battle scene. This is all battle warriors down here. This is in the upper chamber, I think, of the Chichen Itza pyramid it's the Temple of the Jaguar or whatever in Chichen Itza. And this
is Chichen Itza that really huge pyramid, the one that was depicted in Ancient Apocalypse season 1 with Graham Hancock?
I don't recall. Okay. There's the Castile. That's the big pyramid there, the 4-sided pyramid.
Yeah, that's the one.
Same town. Yeah. They have
so it's in the same town.
And it depicts a lot of these warriors with long hair and beards. A whole different thing.
Right.
A lot of spirited people. So I believe a lot of this stuff at Chichen Itza is a lot older than the archaeologists think. And we have a lot of examples of this in the book. Okay. This is another portion. This is again upstairs on one of the other walls. This is another they call him Captain Sun because he's in like a sun disk. And again, this looks like a Stargate. The port down here's gone. It's deteriorated. Interesting thing about this, again, we have the figure sitting in here and he's holding a torch. And on the 4 corners of the disc, we have zip monsters. Here you see the mouth and there's his snout that goes back. So this is all a reference to Mars.
Fascinating.
Also, what I call these Stargates with the Captain Sun inside. This is Sumerian. This is I think this is a woman though that's inside of a lot. But you can find a lot of examples of these star-looking things. Sometimes they have wings off the side like they're flying disc.
Okay.
Very prevalent in Sumerian culture, the Babylonians, Assyrians. So just showing the commonality of the same idea that inside a disc you have a person. So these battles and things that the Maya are reenacting and the destruction that we're seeing on Mars, over here would be the Atlantis chaos. Dr. John Brandenburg, he's had a couple papers published on his discovery of Xenon 129 found on the surface of Mars. NASA supposedly, according to his research, they found out about this with the actual Mariner 9 in the 70s.
In the atmosphere? Is that what they did?
Because they had an atmospheric sniffer on board. And also in the Viking spaceships that went out there with the cameras and took pictures of the surface, they also detected Xenon 129. So they've known about this element or this particular.
Is it a byproduct of a nuclear explosion?
Exactly. It doesn't normally exist naturally. If it does, it's very small. You probably wouldn't even detect it. But there's high levels of it being detected on Mars. Now, we detect that on Earth now because we've done
numerous tests,
decades of nuclear tests. So they know that's a signature for nuclear tests or nuclear explosions. Right. And Brandenburg believes there was an explosion here over Cydonia, and there was one over here in the Galaxia's chaos. This area used to be called Utopia. And then for some reason, NASA retitled it.
Fascinating.
And he believes that these bombs exploded above ground. because there's no huge craters in any of these areas that would show that this is where it blew up. Like Nagasaki blew up over the town, and that's what destroyed everything.
So I think they've said that too, that if you do an explosion above, it has 10x times more destructive power than if you actually landed on the ground and it detonated.
Because all it would be absorbed into the ground.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist.
Real quick, Dr. Brandenburg, he was a scientist did he work for NASA, or what was his background?
No, I don't think John ever worked for the NASA, but he did work for the government. He was part of the Reagan administration early. He goes way back to the Reagan, and he worked on they were doing the Star War back then.
Star Wars, yeah.
And that word again. Yeah, and he's been back and forth working with the government, working with special ops, I think. I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I know he's done a lot of things. Sometimes John will be gone for a year or two. You don't know where the heck he is. Then he'll pop back up. So he's done a lot of interesting things. And the man's he's a genius. The things I'm sure you've spoken to him. You said you had him on.
I haven't spoken to him. I want to speak to him. I haven't been able to connect with him.
All right, I will send him an email about that, because he did make a few comments on our the Society for Planetary Study Research. We have a discussion board, private board. And he's made some comments about this new structure that they're all talking about, that square-shaped foundation.
Yeah, I'd love to chat with him. If you send him a message, I'd love to connect with him.
Now you can see where the opportunity and the curiosity, they're putting them right down the middle here, because they want to, that's where everything is.
So yeah, so they're purposely not going to these.
So that's what some people think, that there's too much stuff. They're finding a lot of stuff at the Gale crater. If you follow any of the rover pictures that are taking these panoramic views, and they're driving around taking pictures as they go, there's all types of weird machinery, things that are in the distance, not far from the rover. Looks like something that blew up, very mechanical pieces. They don't look like rocks. But when NASA sees a rock, they will drive right over to that rock and put the little scanner on there and do a test. But if it looks like an old typewriter, get the heck away.
Yeah, look down the other way.
Don't look there. When it's in the pictures, you can see them. And a lot of them are pretty high contrast, so it's pretty amazing stuff. So there's debris. It appears to be debris everywhere, which goes right along with Brandenburg's whole idea about this nuclear war that took place on Mars for some reason. Now, speaking of wars and the Naranjo and the whole discussion about the Maya Star War, it appears that a lot of the Maya monuments, their stela that they built, when new lords take over a city, they usually do reenactments. They sometimes dress up like the Zip Monster. They dress up like other gods. They dress up like the rain god. So they do reenactments. The famous idea of reenactments was it was documented by the Aztec. They used what was called the Flower War. And they were in a certain area, and there was maybe 10 little settlements around that they were conflicting with, because they all didn't get along. People have ideas that, the Maya were so peaceful and everybody got along in the Aztec. No, they fought each other constantly. American Indians, same thing. The Blackfoot didn't like the Mohicans, and they were all fighting. Everybody's fighting. That's what we do, man.
Seems like it.
Yeah. That's why the Anunnaki had to get out of town, because we're uncontrollable. They had these rituals of the Maya Flower War where they would negotiate with their neighboring settlements, and they'd have these reenactment wars where they wouldn't kill the victims. They'd take them hostage or prisoner, and they would be sacrificed. But they would do reenactments of ancient wars, possibly wars that had to do with Martian wars. The same idea is we do them. We have Civil War reenactments. People that do Civil War reenactments, they are meticulous about getting the right kind of uniform, getting the canteens and the guns and all of the regalia. Sometimes they'll actually have a seamstress will produce these. There's whole companies that make replicas of the outfits. So they're really meticulous about what they do. And they try to reenact battles, famous battles. They're not just out there running around shooting each other with make-believe guns. They're reenacting famous battles, just like the Maya did. It also gets so out of hand. You have young people dressing up like Star Wars characters. This actually happened in Washington, D.C. That's where this picture was from, I think, somewhere over there. So, so everybody does reenactments. We have the jousting that they do, medieval times, correct. So basically what I'm showing these things to the viewers here is just show this is a normal human behavior. If you go to D.C., you have all of the monuments to all of these wars and famous people. And the Maya did the same thing. They built temples to their ancient gods. And I think this whole obsession with their reenactments goes all the way back to Naranjo and Six Earth Place with Mars.
Mm.
And we're finding the remnants of that on the planet.
Interesting.
Then, of course, we have my new book, The Great Architects of Mars, Evidence for the Lost Civilization on the Red Planet.
George, that was totally awesome. I was riveted the whole time. This idea that there was an ancient culture on Mars and that there's ruins up there. You've been studying this for a long time. I first heard about this, think back in the mid 2000s when I was like maybe 24, 25 years old, and it just blew me away. As I'm sure most people are going to be blown away. What we're saying here, the implication of what we're saying here is staggering, right? That there could have been a culture. Now, you've been doing this for 30 years. You're desensitized to this. This is old hat for you. Yeah, of course. But for most people, like, that's shocking. And so what I'd love to do is just maybe, let's just spend 5-10 minutes, if you have time, to go down speculation town to see what happened. We know Dr. Brandenburg has done some significant work with Xenon 129, showing that there was most likely some sort of nuclear explosion there that may have decimated the areas. Do you think, if let's just say that there was people there and these structures were all real and there were sentient life there, where'd they all go?
Well, it's not a simple story, Matt.
What do you think?
People would think there was a culture on Mars and they came to Earth and we're the Martians. That's one take. But I think it's a long history and there's a lot of evidence for what I'm about to suggest in my book, from what Dr. John Brandenburg found and the evidence of Mesoamerican cultures and Naranjo, is that this goes all the way back to the dinosaur time. When there were dinosaurs on Earth, and we don't know what was on the other planets. And there was a huge planet where the asteroid belt is now, which
Tiamat?
Yes, that's what Tom Van Franklin called Planet X.
Okay.
And which blew up. There's a lot of evidence that this planet blew up. Now, that's not a good thing to tell people. People don't want to know that a planet could blow up. We don't know what the internal mechanisms are in our planet. It may blow up at one time. People would not get to sleep at night. Now, either it blew up naturally through some type of internal problem, or it was blown up by Darth Vader. Something blew it up. Now, when they talk about how our solar system evolved, that we had the Big Bang and had all these particles going around all these rocks, and they all congealed and made nice round planets. Now, why didn't the asteroid belt make a planet? What, that area didn't congeal? Everybody else did, even little moons, everything. But the asteroid belt just couldn't get together there and make a planet. So it's obviously the remains of a planet.
So is the idea that this thing had a wide orbit in our solar system?
No, and nothing to do with Zecharia Sitchin. He talks about the asteroid belt, but he calls it the bracelet. It's mentioned in.
But the asteroid belt is out there amongst all those dwarf planets, correct?
No, the asteroid belt is actually, you have Mars and then you have Jupiter. That's where it's at. Between Mars. It's right next door. Mars.
Okay, so it's right there. It's right in our backyard.
It's the asteroid belt. Now, when this planet blew up, we had dinosaurs on Earth 65 million years ago. And they talk about, meteors hit the dinosaurs. That's what killed them. The big meteor that hit the
Sure.
No. What killed the dinosaurs was gravity. You can't build a dinosaur today. You can't do Jurassic Park. They have found Brontosaurus, those ones with the little head on the end.
Yeah.
2 football fields long. They can't, they couldn't stand up. There's too much gravity. So what happened was, when Planet X blew up, we're going to get there about the stuff on Mars. When the planet blew up, it pushed all the planets closer to the sun, more gravity.
More pressure. Yeah.
Planet blows up, planets move closer to the sun. All the dinosaurs died because they can't stand up. And sure, a few meteors hit there and there because you got particles flying.
Sure.
That's why the moon has a lot of meteors on one side. Mars has a lot of meteors on one side because when that blew up, like, scarred everything. And all the scars hit on Earth because if we have a green planet, everything, evolves.
Grew up and over it.
If you go on the internet now and take a look at Venus, a lot of scientists think that Venus had life at one time. They keep calling, that's the sister planet to Mars and Earth.
Because at one point it was in the Goldilocks zone and then got pushed closer.
And when it got closer, now it's burned up. Got too hot.
Interesting.
So that's dead. The dinosaurs all died because too much gravity.
Mm.
Millions of years go by. Now on Earth, Mars is whatever civilization was on Mars is gone.
Mm-hmm.
We just speculate. We have no idea because the planet blew up. Everything was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Now Earth is in the Goldilocks area. Now we have primitive man. Dinosaurs are gone. We have the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnon.
Mm.
These are like the two big guys that walk around on our planet. Now, my scenario is that Mars is a dead planet. Earth is the gemstone here.
Mm-hmm.
Now we got to break away culture from some other galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
Either they're not getting along with their neighbors, they're having problems, they're leaving their government, who knows what. But I call it, it's a breakaway civilization. They come to our solar system hiding from whoever's, they don't want them to know where they're at. They come to our solar system, like the Anunnaki. To our solar system, they find Earth. They put bases on the moon and on Mars as gatekeepers. Okay? We don't have big civilization on Mars. We have gatekeepers. They have little places that they're building to keep an eye out in space. Who's coming in our solar system now? Because we're protecting this beautiful little planet that we found. Okay? That's why there was bases on the moon and Mars, because those were gatekeepers. Mars was to be the gatekeeper out in space. Somebody coming in from Pluto area, they would alert and they'd fight it out there. Whoever was looking for these people. Okay. The moon was like the second gate because that was around us. So you'd have, like George Bush said, better to fight over there than fight over here. Okay.
Right.
When he could speak. And that's, I think, what happened. The moon and Mars were used as outposts. They were gatekeepers. Let's call it the gatekeeping hypothesis.
Interesting.
So we had bases on the moon, bases on Mars. The inhabitants of the culture that came to Earth found the available man, the Neanderthal Cro-Magnon, through genetic engineering. They made us to work for them. Like the same idea as the Sumerians did, making the humans to work for them.
The Zachariah Sitchin story.
Similar to that. So we had the culture living here. They made us to work for them because they're lazy people. They didn't want to do all this stuff. They're Spock, too busy playing chess.
Correct.
So then time passes and we have bases on the moon. We have all these structures being built on Mars and they find them. Who's ever looking for them? Or some other extraterrestrial group that comes in. They have battles on Mars. They have battles on the moon. The victors have to rebuild. So we got things destroyed on Mars, things destroyed on the moon. The victors take over, possibly the same group or the new group. So they rebuild on Earth, they rebuild on the moon, and the structures we're seeing now on Mars is what they built after that fight.
So that's the remnants.
Then I think what happened, either they got found out by somebody else and then it was another war. And that last war is when they left because they weren't safe anymore. They had to get the hell out of here. And plus they were dealing with aggressive humans because they used the available man. They made us and they used Neanderthals who were very aggressive and they couldn't handle us. Look at us. We're a warlike people.
Yeah, sure seems like it.
So whoever was looking for them found them. So it was no longer safe here. So they left. That's why everything was abandoned on Mars. That's why we're finding some structures and the structures are made to sometimes look like geometrically shaped mounds because they're trying to hide. Right? When you look over, like you don't know what you're looking at. Oh, that's just if you're flying over looking for these little guys, you're like, oh, that's just hills and mounds and stuff. But if you look closely, you'll see they're in line and they're more geometric than you would find in nature. So I think that's how we're finding all this stuff on Mars. And the rover is finding the evidence of the ground battles and things that were machinery's blown up and stuff like that. So that's my story.
That's a great story. That's fantastic. The hard part is that you're seeing these monuments and these structures that are quite anomalous on Mars. And there's got to be some sort of reason for it. And I just hope that we get back there, we can get boots on the ground and really discover what the heck is going on here and with boots on the ground. But George, this has been an absolutely stimulating conversation. I'd love to have you back on. Tell people how they can find you, how they can find your book, and what you got going on.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure talking to you. You and I seem to be on the same page on a lot of this stuff. If the viewers or listeners out there want to get more information about seeing more structures on Mars, please order my book. I don't make a lot of money on this. The publishers make way more money than I do, but my purpose is to get the message out. I want people to look at this stuff, make up your own decision. You can order The Great Architects of Mars. It's available at the Barron Company. That's my publisher. It's also available on most bookstores. You can get it on Amazon. A couple weeks back, we were the #1 new book on Mars on Amazon, so it's been selling pretty well. Get the book. It's very well illustrated. I do all the drawings in the book, which anytime you put a book together and you want to do examples of archaeology or any type of artifacts, these museums and stuff want to charge you all kinds of money. So luckily I can draw, so I drew everything. Saved
Perfect.
a lot of money for me and the publisher. So it's well illustrated. It's also, there's a forward by our good friend, John Brandenburg. Dr. Brandenburg does the forward. And my good friend I was just talking to on the phone, I hope that Matt probably cut that part out, but Jim Miller, he does the forward also. So it's got Dr. Brandenburg and Jim Miller do forwards. And there's 13 chapters. The book goes into depth with a lot of these structures. And at the end of the book, we do a little speculation about how these structures got there. I discuss Zachariah Sitchin's connection with the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki seem to have a direct relationship with Mesoamerican cultures. And then the last chapter talks about this whole idea of Naranjo in the Star Wars and the Zip Monsters connection to Mars, and how possibly these structures that we're finding on Mars relate to Mesoamerican mythology.
Fantastic. I'll put links to all your stuff in the description. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us. Cheers, everybody. Have a great day.
Peace out, man.
Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.